Hey guys, how you doing? It's David Hess here with my co-host Ryan for Slate of Mind Week 8. We are both traveling, so if the video and audio is kind of choppy this week, it's because we are on travel setups. How you doing today, Ryan?
I'm good. I'm good. It can't be any worse than my audio last week. Sounded like I was underwater in a fish tank. So, just hoping we tested this out ahead of time. Hoping it sounds better this week.
Yeah, and so if you don't know, if you haven't watched the show before, the show is kind of where we take more of a roster construction and game theory approach to the slate. It's kind of like an early look based on what we're expecting to see this week and kind of how you could leverage different situations in order to get ahead of the field if we're right about what that actually looks like. With that said, Ryan, you had a pretty good week last week, right?
I did. I did. I got third in the $15 three max
Cool.
smaller
I'm going
field
to go ahead and
contest.
pull up your
Played.
lineup and you can talk through the thought process and kind of like how you kind of ended up there this week. Is that cool?
Yeah, yeah. Let's do it. Yeah, it was a $15 three max, 1,200 people or so.
Cool. So this is the lineup. As you can see, 500 bucks to Mr. Ryan. So you just kind of want to talk through kind of how you got to here and the kind of game theory that went into this.
Yeah, for sure. So I identified some stacks that I wanted to play during the week. We talked about a few of them last week. In particular, the reason I ended up on the Chargers was the cluster injuries to the Colts defensive line, the defensive backfield. So their top three cornerbacks were all out, and in addition to that, when I was looking through the range of outcomes on PayDirt for different stacks, the Chargers had one of the best 4x um, projections for the stack. And I saw that Quentin Johnston was coming back from his injury. He projected very well and was garnering ownership, but Herbert and the rest of the stack wasn't as owned. And Keenan Allen was a key piece of this too. So anyway, that's how I got on the stack. When it comes to building, I did eat some chalk with the lineup. Um, I had Rasheed Rice, I had Judkins, and they were. I think there's still a case. You could talk through whether Judkins was a good play or not, but within the context of this lineup, I knew that I could eat some ownership. Being that it was only 1,200 people, I didn't want to get where I'm just playing 5 and 10% on players the whole way through. So I felt like that gave me a nice floor. I started with that. And from there, if I was going to target this game environment, the next decision I make was whether or not I was going to run it back with Jonathan Taylor. Um, and actually, JT had a massive week. He was on the winning lineup in this contest. I elected to play Warren, hoping that the passing environment going back and forth, um, that there would be correlation there. Now the Colts were so dominant in the running game. JT ended up paying off his salary, being a fantastic play, but I elected to go with Warren there. Um, some of the other decision points were which Chargers players to play, and I went with Johnston. In part because of his air yards, his average depth of target. He just has a massive ceiling when he hits. He actually didn't hit the ceiling in this game, but Keenan Allen did, who was lower owned. And initially, and I was talking with another player about the decision of Ladd versus Keenan Allen, and the Pater projections had a better 4x and actually a higher projection on Allen versus McConkey, and he
So
was lower owned.
something really funny about that, just from my perspective, by the way, is I actually had Keenan Allen as a top play and Johnson as a top play, but not McConkey. And it's because just like a little bit of no ball kind of in this.
Yeah.
When they were all three actually healthy, Keenan Allen actually plays the role of in the seams, kind of like in the slot and in the seams and in between. And the
hmm
Colts run a certain defense that like I saw a stat for where like Keenan Allen is actually Justin Herbert's first read in what the Colts defense runs. So like a little bit of no ball. I don't know if that was like in the projections or whatever, but like just a little bit of like context to that outside of numbers, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I would say that both of us take a lot of time to understand the game, injury reports, matchups, but we also marry that with projections. In my case, I didn't know that. I know there were three cornerbacks out for the Colts. I knew it was a decently high game total between two good teams, and I was trying to make some decision. I'm just, for me, it came down to a better median projection and less ownership. And that's how I got there with Allen. And the pay dirt tools do a great job at helping us identify, you know, projections and players that we want to play. So the last part of this, which was some of the, this is where more of the game theory came in, is I decided, if I'm not going to play Dallas and I'm not going to play the Washington pass game, which were very owned, who benefits in that scenario? It's the highest game total on the week. And if those passing attacks aren't necessary for the optimal lineup, where would those points be going? And so, although he had quite a bit of ownership himself, that's why I went with Williams. If the passing attack from Dallas fails, and that game is not as competitive as we think the spread indicates, maybe the Cowboys are in a leading game state and running the ball. And at the end of the game, I was going up in some of the standings as Cowboys were no longer running. No longer passing, and they were running the ball with Williams, and I was like, he's just ripping off yards. Now, unfortunately, they were so dominant that Jaden Blue came in on the final drive, and I was like, I'm watching Bo Nix just score 4 touchdowns in 6 minutes, and so that ultimately surpassed me in the first place, but I was happy, not with necessarily the raw points from Williams, but that, and you don't have, we don't have to be perfect in every player that we pick in our lineup, but I said if Dallas passing attack fails, the running attack should garner quite a bit of points. So that's how I got there. And Swift, I did have the Browns defense. It was chalky. This was a small field contest. I had played Judkins and Browns defense together. We talked about the pressure matchup last week was insane. The Browns were going to destroy Tua, and the Browns destroyed Tua. I just didn't get too cute there. Now, the other part of this is I was deciding about what kind of other player to put in the running back or flex spot, was that the Bears were also one of the heavier owned teams, one of the heavier owned stacks. I could be wrong about that, David, but I thought I saw quite a bit of projection there.
They started really high, but they came down by the time the slate actually started. I think that Caleb was like 6th in ownership, 7th maybe.
Okay. That game had a lot of weather involved. It had a soft defense with the New Orleans. And if that game wasn't competitive, is that another scenario in which the running back would perform well?
The backup running back actually outscored DeAndre Swift.
Manungai?
Yeah. And that's actually the play that I think won you what you did, by the way. So, just for reference, I did terrible last week. I played all the same players that you see here, except I don't have any DeAndre Swift, and I had a bunch of Jordan Mason that scored 11 points instead.
Yeah. I think that was probably the key to the success for this lineup. And I had played Mason. Actually, Mason I had in more lineups than Swift. But if, that was, in this case, one of the points of leverage for the lineup.
I actually, just to talk through kind of what I ended up with real quick. I obviously didn't make any money. I think I won back like 40% or whatever. But I essentially hedged my bets on 3 running backs. I played a ton of Judkins, Jonathan Taylor, and Jordan Mason, and then kind of spread it out underneath of that. Something that I think is really interesting this year, and I talked about it in Discord, and we kind of had a back and forth about it and everything else, but as you can see here, is that the chalk this year has hit. Judkins was a great play, even at 50%, unfortunately. I know that it took 3 touchdowns to get there or whatever, but
his
Miami rush
efficiency
defense
wasn't great.
was terrible. Judkins was really cheap, and more importantly, we had no good running back plays this week. Rashi Rice was good chalk, 23 points.
Yeah, we talked about that last week.
Yeah, and if you look at your lineup, you really only have 2 pivots, right? It's Keenan Allen and DeAndre Swift who both hit, and I guess Herbert. But everybody else is like relatively chalky, up to 50%, even the defense. And so like I think with projections and sims and all that, like and how easily accessible they are, I mean, look at PayDirt where you can get sims for $40 or some really kick-ass tools. But yeah, all that's so easily accessible that like I think we've seen the field get actually like pretty good, and chalk is like mostly good. I mean, there's bad chalk, right? Like we talked about Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt and why he was terrible chalk, and everybody played him anyway.
That was a great call by you.
But yeah, chalk is mostly really good. I do think we're going to get some pretty fragile chalk this week, though. On another note.
But before we move on, and perhaps maybe you want to take down this lineup. I mean, just from a build perspective, I'm hand building all of my builds, and in lineups in which I don't have I'm player lower owned stacks. I'm having more. I'm eating more chalk alongside with it because that the contests I'm playing, you don't have to get super far out of line. But like my Washington and Dallas stacks did not have Judkins in them, so just kind of sharing that from how I'm building. But we talked about the ultimate skeleton key to last week that you mortgaged your financial future on. Do you remember the team?
Was it the Titans?
It was the Titans.
You know what's really funny about that, Ryan? You know what I'm going back to this week? The Titans.
Okay.
I'm playing them again.
Okay.
Probably like 30% instead of 5.
I know I took the minus 1,000 side of, or higher, I guess, that they would not be in the winning lineup, but
you know what? DK was an amazing play. And so, like, just so you know, when I set up my Titans
we talked about the stack.
Yeah, but, like, when I set them up, I actually had, like, 5% DK that I, like, wanted in there.
Yeah.
And, the funny part is I didn't play a lot of Cam Ward. I did it in one, like I said, as a petty stack, just because I said that I would. But I did play in early slate 30% Alec and Minor, who I actually thought was, like, a really, really outstanding play. With all that said, I think that this will kind of segue us into this week. They waived Tyler Lockett. And Tyler Lockett's gone. If Calvin Ridley's out again, then like you're looking at Alec Minor. I think Chig was out. Gunnar Helm played. Chamir DK and then Cam Ward. And with this week, it's really funny because last week we had so many good game environments that you could pick anything. We'll talk about this more in a little bit, but like we don't have any good game environments this week. Like the games suck this week. We have a decent one where like everyone's gonna want to play Denver and Dallas, but like Denver's defense is really good. It's not really like shootout material, I don't think, and so like I'll talk through like exactly what that looks like. The only actual good game environment we have from just an environment standpoint, not talking about the teams, but talking about kind of like matchups and pace of play and all that stuff. Legit, the only good one that we have this week is the Tennessee Colts game.
What about Baltimore, Chicago, or Philly Giants?
So I told you that I was tweaking my process with kind of like matchups and everything since. I'll show this for a second. Just to show you kind of what I'm looking at. And you guys, I don't want to show too much of this because it's like my own personal sauce and I'd rather not leak it to the internet. But let me just show you. So these here is kind of what you're looking for. You kind of want green on both sides, right? We've got Vegas totals over here. Also, remember we talked about something 2 weeks ago, and I told you that people are going to want to stack against the Ravens, and it's like the worst idea on the planet because their defense is actually healthy now. And because of that, I think we're going to see an incredibly chalk Chicago, and they're terrible plays. If you look at the last 2 weeks that the Ravens have played before the bye, they actually held teams like 9 points or less. So like this,
their defense is pretty much back.
Yeah, so this looks like it's a really good matchup, and it's like pretty cheap, and everyone's going to play it, but it's actually not that good. And then you could also, if Lamar Jackson plays, Baltimore's interesting, but like I think it's a good chance he hasn't practiced yet that we see Cooper Rush again.
Practice limited.
Okay. Yeah. So when you look at these over here, like I said, if we actually look at prior weeks, we actually had a lot of like good matchups across the board. As you can see, we really don't. Just for reference, these are quarterbacks, wide receivers, tight ends, and running backs. So this is the part you want to pay attention to. You want a lot of green right here. And as you can look at all this, we really don't have that pretty much anywhere, right?
Yeah.
So the only ones where it's a good matchup on both sides, and this is pass rate over expected as well. So like you ideally want at least 2 yellows, 2 greens is even better because it means they'll pass more. Really, the only one we have is this game. So do I really want a ton of Tennessee? Probably not, but I do probably want a lot of Colts. The only problem with that is I also think that Jonathan Taylor is one of the best plays on the slates again. So, like I said, just kind of like into this and going off the top of this, this is a game that looks really good. And if I said in the beginning of the season that I thought there was going to be at least 1 to 2 weeks where Tennessee stacks would win you something, when we talk about this, Cam Ward has thrown the ball 35 times or more 2 weeks in a row. All the pieces are dirt cheap, and this is actually a week where we have a lot of really good pay-ups. And so I actually think playing really cheap stacks or really expensive stacks, one or the other, not really in between. But like the really cheap stacks, you could get to like Bijan Robinson, Devin DeChain, and Jonathan Taylor in your lineup, who are in 3 elite spots. And that's not even including Jamar Chase, who's in a pretty good spot. It's not even including Derrick Henry and Zay Flowers, who are in pretty good spots. I think we have a lot of really good one-offs this week, but not a lot of really good stacks. And so the question for me is, what ugly stack do you feel comfortable with to get all the top plays in your lineup?
Okay. And for you, is that Tennessee?
Tennessee is the most interesting game environment. I'm not positive that that's where I'm going to end up, especially if they get steamed in any way. If, like, let's say that Tennessee is, like, even, like, 5th highest owned, I'm not playing Tennessee. Like, Tennessee is a terrible team. That'd be, like, ridiculous. Mm-hmm. I think there's a couple that you could talk about, though. So I built a couple of dummy lineups this week just to kind of see, like, what's possible to build with. I built a Cam Ward lineup. I built a Bo Nix lineup, a Tyrod Taylor lineup, a Lamar lineup, and a Baker lineup.
Oh my goodness.
When I went to the Lamar Jackson and the Baker ones, I was using players like Tez Johnson, who I think is in a good spot with no Mike Evans. He's probably going to be relatively chalky, maybe not. He's 4,300.
Yeah. Oh, I think he will be.
Yeah, Rashid Shaheed, who I think Olave will be chalky, but like people don't like to play Shaheed because he literally gets 6 or 30.
Yeah.
And like K. Dotton, Jerry Jeudy, there's like a lot of those cheaper guys that like have a chance to pay off. But then if you look at the Cam Ward lineup, like let me read you this. Tell me this isn't insane. You can play this week. Cam Ward, Devin DeChain, Bijan Robinson, DK, Tez Johnson, Olave, Noah Fant, Jonathan Taylor, and Ravens defense. You can also play Tyrod Taylor, Devin DeChain, Bijan Robinson, Jamar Chase, Zay Flowers, Josh Reynolds, Noah Fant, and J.K. Dobbins. And so we're like in a spot where like there's a couple of like these cheaper like puke stacks that like you don't need them to crush because we have so many good one-offs that like if we actually have, let's say, 3 players that hit 35 plus fantasy points this week, it becomes a thing that like you probably need all 3.
I haven't looked at the projections yet. Pater doesn't have them up yet. I was pretty resistant to that idea last week from Tennessee standpoint. I played a Cardinal stack that was my second best performing lineup. So I think the thing when you play a puke stack is you also have to consider the opportunity cost. If you don't play a stack that reaches a ceiling like the 39 points from Bo Nix or the 32 from Herbert. And I think the other thing that makes me a little bit concerned about going that low this week is the pricing on some of the top tier players like Jonathan Taylor at 9,500. So, I think as the pricing gap goes higher for some of those plays, then there's it's possible that the mid-range players at 6-7K, if they have 30-point games, are going to be preferred over 9-5 Taylor.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's easy to say that a lot of the time, but usually a lot of the games this year we haven't had the stars on main slate. We haven't seen that. This week we have Jonathan Taylor, Christian McCaffrey, Bijan Robinson, Jamar Chase, C.D. Lamb, Saquon Barkley, Devin DeChain, Nico Collins, Egbuka, James Cook, all on the same slate. On top of that, we also have Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts, and Dak all on the same slate. We haven't seen this many top players on one slate since the beginning of the season. And so out of those players, you bet out of 9 top players, we're going to get a couple like 35, 40-point games. And like I said, in your 6K players, they can usually get to like 28, 32-point games. But typically when you have those top players, if any of them hit like 38 plus, you can't match it. Can you let her out, please? Or take her. And so once that happens, unless you hit on all of your 6K players that like make the gap up different, let's say that what's one of the games where they're playing each other? Let's say Devin Achane and Bijan Robinson duel it out back and forth, and between the two they end up with 350 rushing yards and 4 touchdowns.
Mm-hmm.
You probably can't compete with that with any of this. Like Quishon Judkins, a great game for Judkins would be 30 points. What if Bijan and Achane combined for 70?
Yeah, I think the issue still is that even those cheap plays, like the cheap stacks, still have to pay off to some degree. I mean, are there any alternatives to Tennessee that we could talk about? Because I'm
Jets.
just. Anyone else?
No, not really.
Okay, I think
we would have had Baltimore. Like if we had Huntley, I would have loved Huntley. Honestly,
I would not play Huntley.
If you don't like either of those, you could also play Dylan Gabriel in Cleveland. I think you're going to have to take her. She could jump that fence.
I mean, I'd be more inclined to play Radler with Shaheed than I would be to play a Tennessee stack.
That's okay. Like I said, favor fortune's the bolt. I will say the last thing that I think is doable, and it's not as cheap as you want it to be anymore, is Joe Flacco stacks. The thing with Joe Flacco that doesn't make it cheap is that Jamar Chase is really expensive. So, like, you really need Jamar Chase to hit for 40 and bring Joe Flacco with him. Like, if that doesn't happen, your stack fails.
Yeah, I'm more interested in that than I am Titans. And I do think there's an interesting pricing dynamic where we have the running backs are really highly priced compared to the wide receivers. Like you have JT, McCaffrey, and Bijan all essentially 9K or more. And then the highest priced wide receiver is Chase, Lamb, and then Pickens. And Chase is 8-1, Lamb is 7-8, Pickens 7-1, and Buka 7 flat, which I think's really I think he's going to project great as long as we have some level of confidence in his health. So when I think about roster construction this week, I'm interested to see what types of constructions we'll see from there. I mean, I'm not completely writing off the cheap stack. I just when there's like very, very little offensive production, I'm not interested in a cheap stack. Even when the matchup's good, just from how I've been playing recently, but yeah, I mean, maybe.
Out of curiosity, what is very little production though? Because like if I actually pull up Tennessee and we look at just their top players over the last couple of weeks, they've had a player hit over 20 points almost every single week. Did you know that? Almost always at like 3K. And so like it's kind of like a roulette, right? You don't know who it's going to be, but we've seen Calvin Ridley. Calvin Ridley won me $250 a couple of weeks ago. We've seen Alec Amanor have a good game. We've seen DK have a good game. We haven't seen Pollard have any good games. He just never gets there, unfortunately.
Yeah, and Ward hasn't gotten there. I mean, he had 12 points last week at 4,600. So
yeah, the problem with it is though, and we've talked about this, is that he's actually really bad under pressure, but he's like fairly good. Did you go?
No. There's a truck out there.
One of the things, I don't know if you've looked at the predicted pressure so far, but he's actually in a relatively neutral matchup, and he's like pretty decent when he's in a clean pocket. And then if we also look, we talked about how Brian Callahan would be gone, like making a difference, and like it did. They looked better. They looked more coherent, I think. Like I said, like this isn't like one of those things. Like I think if you play the three of them combined, you're spending like roughly like 12K in salary for your top 3 players, and like really the only thing you're looking for is like 45 fantasy points between the 3 of them.
Who do you stack with Ward though?
I really like the idea of Ward, Alec, and DK, or one of those and Chig.
Is Chig injured?
If he is, it's even better because you get Gunnar Helm. But I don't think so. I think he just didn't. He had 2 targets last week. He just didn't do anything. But we had Gunnar Helm, who had 8 last week. Like I said, that's not really a winning. That's like not what you're looking for. But like I said, if you look at DK, and DK's actually been so it's funny, man. I saw people talking about DK before this week because he was kind of getting targets up until this point. He's had 5 targets. So since week 2, he's had 5, 4, 0, 5, 3, 4 targets. Last week he caught 4 targets, he had 4 targets, caught 4 of them for 70 yards and a touchdown. Plus he's getting rushing attempts. He also has 7 rushing attempts this year, so they're manufacturing touches for him. They like him. They like him so much that they let Tyler Lockett go. And like I said, this isn't really a thing where like I don't know that Cam Ward's going to be like the play, but I feel really strongly that the bad quarterbacks. You have Andy Dalton this week as well. By the way, I forgot. So we've got Andy Dalton and 10 stacks that you could technically run for around 10K as well. But like I said, the reason I've fallen on Tennessee is because the game environment's good. And like you can stack that very easily with Jonathan Taylor, right? So if you think that the Colts are going to go up and Jonathan Taylor's going to score 3 touchdowns, their corners are still hurt. They're still not in a super good position. And it could be just to a point where they're throwing the ball more. I mean, like, you have to think when a team's throwing the ball 35 times a game, it hits eventually. And, like, it's one of those things where, like, even a blind squirrel finds a nut, like once a year or whatever they say. Like, Tennessee, on average, is probably not a good play. But, like, I guarantee by the end of the season, there is a week that someone wins $1 million with the Tennessee stack.
I think that's a good way to describe it. I mean, I feel like you're trying to catch the falling knife with Tennessee. And it's like, I get what you're saying, though. The payoff could be great when it happens because it's zero owned. You get all these top plays that go along with it. So
usually there's not enough top plays to justify it. That's why I really didn't do it last week is because like we didn't have enough
pricing, I think, makes that tougher for all those plays to
I don't think it does. I mean, like, it doesn't matter what they're priced. Like I said, it's at the end of the day, this is a game of points. You can talk about 4x multipliers all you want, but they don't actually matter. If you have 4 players that score 40-plus fantasy points, it doesn't matter what they costed. You need them on your roster to win.
Yeah.
And because we have so many top players, we are at the best chance we have for that to happen than we've had in quite a while. You've heard me talk a lot about playing cheaper stacks and everything else because you could get away with it. You know, last week you only had to beat Jalen Hurts, who beat almost everybody, by the way, but nobody played him. So, like, but like, all that you needed was Jalen Hurts to fail. And if Jalen Hurts failed and one of your cheaper quarterbacks did well, you were in a good spot. But so, like, in general, when you're looking at this, the actual theory that you're looking at is that you need all of these players to fail for your next level of players to become the best plays. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I understand what you're saying. There's a lot of players. I just, with the widening price, and maybe I'm thinking about this wrong, so I'm open. I mean, I'm just, and maybe it's
when
my
you
own
say
bias.
that, what are the players you think that are in the mid ranges that could actually score 30 fantasy points this week?
Would it be cheating to sort by ceiling on the player range of outcomes, which James now made live?
No, that's fine.
Yeah,
because like when I look at this,
Zay
I think
Flowers
there's
at 5,400. Zay Flowers, Drake London, Chris Olave, Jackson Dart.
How many 30-point games does Olave have this year? Or actually in his career? He has 0, by the way, in his whole career, if you're curious. He's been in the league for 5 years. He's never hit 30 points a single time. So, like, I get, like, how projections and stuff work, but, like, a very large sample size says that that's not going to happen.
So, let me just give you my initial take on this game, which I just have a different way of looking at this. So, I don't want to be super invested in needing bad teams to perform well in the 10% of times that they do, at least for the contest that I'm playing, 1,000 people, like a few thousand under 5,000. But the way that I'm looking at this game right now is that the Colts are the most popular stack. That's just initial projections on that. Jonathan Taylor's going to be incredibly popular as well, so there's just going to be a lot of ownership going to that game. But what if Tennessee can't make that game competitive? It's a 14-point spread. And I don't want to be a prisoner of recency bias, but last week was a great example of offenses pushing each other to reach ultimate ceilings in the Denver Giants game, which ultimately was the best stack you could have, at least the winning one in my contest, and then the Chargers Colts. So if you have dead fish of a Titans who are 14-point underdogs, are we seeing Amir Abdullah by the fourth quarter just pounding the rock and nothing's happening?
I mean, would you say that 41-20 and 40-6 were like not covering the spread? Because games that are 40-6 and 41-20 are those games that we would say were blowouts that we would expect to see Amir Abdullah in the fourth quarter? Because I'll do a spoiler alert. Jonathan Taylor hit 30 fantasy points in both of those games.
But is 30 points enough at 9-5?
Yeah, definitely. Like I said, you're focusing too much on salary instead of points, man. It doesn't actually matter. Unless a cheaper player hits also 40 points, that price doesn't matter. At the end of the day, everybody has $60,000 to spend, and your goal is to score as many points as possible. So if Jonathan Taylor definitely hits 30 points and nobody else hits 30 points, it doesn't matter if he was 12K. You need him to win.
Okay. So just my initial impression on this game is I'm considering being underweight or taking a different, I'm thinking about, I want to see what the build paths look like this week because the Colts are going to garner a lot of ownership. And my take on that is this has the potential to fail. This game environment has the potential to fail because of the disparity in teams. So I'm going to consider an underweight stance to it, and then also looking at how I could build differently. If people are going to be going Jones to Pittman to Downs, I see Downs is pretty popular, or JT. I'm going to be thinking about maybe how I can have a different build path.
I have zero interest in Daniel Jones, not a sliver.
Yeah.
Like I said, I actually think I will avoid the middle range of quarterbacks at all costs this week. And if you're going there, I think it has to be Bo Nix.
Okay.
I think that, like I said, my whole strategy this week is to either maximize for the top quarterback, which is possible. Right? Like I said, we have Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts, and Dak. All four of them are let's probably take Dak out. He probably won't hit 40, but Hurts, Jackson, and Allen are all capable of 40-point games as quarterbacks.
Mm-hmm.
That almost never happens. If one of those hit 40 points as a quarterback, they will be optimal. They just will. Maybe not fully optimal because Josh Allen might not take anybody with him. He could score 53 and have wide receiver 1 have 13 points.
Yeah.
Which is kind of the danger with him. But they have ceilings that the rest of the quarterbacks can't match. But on the other chance of that, you say if the three of those fail, then the cheap quarterbacks, even if they just score 15 to 18, become really playable. And so, when you're actually doing that, it's with the idea that you're leveraging also against those other quarterbacks. So, Derrick Henry becomes really interesting. Saquon Barkley becomes really interesting. Javonte Williams is interesting. And the idea when you're playing cheap quarterbacks isn't just, cheap quarterback, jam it in. It's the idea that the top quarterbacks, because of that, fail for some reason, which means that it's not important to have a high-scoring quarterback as long as they don't completely bust. And so that's really what you're hoping for when you play any of those cheap quarterbacks.
And that, I think, from a roster construction standpoint, is really interesting. We have Daniel Jones and Bo Nix at 6K projected to be the most popular quarterbacks. So you're saying go cheaper, go more expensive, and that's my initial impression too. Although I am going to have a Bo Nix stack, I'm just going to be looking at how that could be a unique approach to it. But that, I think, I'm really on board with that. If the field is going to cluster right at 6K, and they're going to have one of those, and then they're going to have some very common, they're going to have Tez Johnson, we're going to have JT, my lineups are going to be different in how they're formatted.
Yeah, and so like I said, what I really like about it is that because people are playing all the mid-ranges like you were talking about, they probably can't get to 3 of the top studs. And so my whole idea behind everything that I'm building this week is if we say out of 9 studs, 3 of them have 30 plus, can't reach games, and you get the right 3. You're ahead of everybody. Your 3 players has 90 to 110 points now.
Yeah.
And it means that you get a little bit more wiggle room. And so that's kind of like the idea behind it. Like I said, it's not really about the quarterback, man. Like, I'd be thrilled if I play any of the guys I talked about, Andy Dalton, Tyrod Taylor, Cam Ward, any of those, and they get me like 16 fantasy points. It's a win. As long as the pass catcher that was played with them was the top projected person, they hit like 20 to 24. And then you need your 3 studs that you were able to get because of that to put up game-winning scores. That's the idea.
Yeah.
And so, like, it's really not about that. Like, if you're playing a cheap quarterback, the thought process is actually that everybody else has failed.
Right. Right. You're not missing out on 40 points from Allen or Lamar.
Yeah, because, like, if Allen, Hurts, Lamar
Hurts.
Jackson get there, it doesn't matter. Your Cam Ward could have 20 fantasy points, and it's still meaningless.
Right.
You can't catch the 48-point Josh Allen game.
Right.
And so,
Yeah.
like I said, it's like these are like constructions you have to think through. And so, like, it really isn't as black as white as me just saying, like, oh, like, cheap quarterback good. Like, it's really probably not. It's like I'm just kind of banking that the wide receivers and running backs that are expensive outscore the expensive quarterbacks. And then all you need at that point is, like, Cam Ward to outscore Tez Johnson. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. I think this is a good discussion to have as we go into the week. I'm interested to see here. I know it's early. Do you have any indication of how popular top-end wide receivers are going to be? Because of the pricing, I'm just interested in how those constructions are going to be.
I think for the most part, we see mostly balanced builds with like 1 or 2 cheap pieces and 1 or 2 top pieces. I think that based on just what I'm looking at, I think Igbuka is probably the wide receiver that we see play the most because Mike Evans and Chris Godwin are out. So like at 7K, people are flood to Igbuka. And I also think that we see a lot of Jonathan Taylor and Bijan Robinson.
Yeah.
So, like, to me, most builds will have Igbuka and then one of Jonathan Taylor or Bijan Robinson. Like I said, so, like, I think something really interesting is to play Jonathan Taylor and Bijan Robinson. Or I really like, especially, Devin Achane a little bit lower because Cleveland has been, or Atlanta has been pretty susceptible to running backs, especially passing running backs lately. And he's like a little bit cheaper, but he's right in like that Igbuka range. And so like I think Devin Achane is going to be one of those really overlooked players this week. And so that's what I'm saying. It's like I really actually like all 5 of the top running backs. And with McCaffrey at 9K now, I don't think no one's going to play him, even though he just had 40 points last week for like the first time in forever. Yeah. And so like
the matchup's bad too.
So many top of the line plays, man, that like all I can think about is like stuffing as many of them in my roster as possible. And with so like little real value this week outside of Tez Johnson. Like I said, we have a couple like 5K guys, but as of right now, we don't have any like really good.
Flowers is going to be really popular at 5,400.
Yeah. I think Henry.
If
people would end up playing Henry this week.
Yeah. He's going to be
like 6K Henry. I could see him being steamed to the moon. So like you're paying less for Derrick Henry than Cam Scatterbu, which is like absolutely absurd. But if you pay attention, even when you get like a little lower, like even tight ends, we don't have a lot of good tight ends this week that are cheaper. Like George Kittle will probably be pretty played, I think, at 4,500 because like he's like an elite talent. He's a whole $1,000 cheaper than Tyler Warren, so like we probably see a lot of like George Kittle. But like then Harold Fannin, who's like everybody's like favorite cheap piece, is like the 4th most expensive tight end on the slate now.
Yeah.
And so like you can get down in these like cheap tight ends, but they're all like relatively bad. They've got like their own warts that people probably won't want to play. So I think it's pretty positive. We see a lot of Kittle, a lot of Warren, a lot of Ferguson, a lot of Fannin. People will be above 4,400 or more. Pretty positive. I think we see a lot of the 6K quarterbacks. I think we see a lot of Tez Johnson. But like I said, there's not actually a lot of value this week unless somebody gets hurt midweek and something opens up again.
Yeah.
Which means that people are going to build mostly balanced builds with 1 or 2 studs.
I think Baltimore's going to be a really critical. How you decide to handle Baltimore in your individual lineups, I think, is going to be an important decision point this week too,
I think
because
it's
you're going to
actually
have.
really easy. If you're playing Baltimore, you should be playing Lamar Jackson plus 2 pass catchers and playing it like he actually airs it out. Like, I would like the idea of Flowers, Bateman, and Lamar more than anything else. And because, like, Flowers and Bateman are both, like, relatively cheap now. So, like, if they score, like, 45, 50 fantasy points between the two of them, and Lamar Jackson runs for a touchdown or two, you're, like, looking pretty good.
Yeah.
But, like I said, I think one of the just weirdest things, man, is, like, as you go down here, I mean, you have Wan'Dale Robinson at 5,200. That's, like, probably a doable play. Past that, though, you get to guys like Keon Coleman for 5K. You can play Tyler Algier for 4,800.
Yeah, these are scary.
What about Tajay Spears for 4,700 bucks? You get Shaheed, that's decent. You get Jennings at 4,600, but he's been pretty terrible this year.
Yeah, I can't see
Sterling
people
Shepard.
playing a lot of Shaheed or Jennings.
Sterling Shepard at 4,500.
I think
and then
everyone's
you
going to be
have-
on Tez.
Yeah, Tez is at 4,300, and then after him, dude, I mean, like, you have Troy Franklin, Jerry Jeudy, Bateman, and I think that's the end of the list of playable players.
So Tez is going to be an interesting. I mean, if he is as popular as we think he's going to be at 4,300, I'm seeing quite a bit of pivots in his range. I got to see what the projection is for Shepard. But Shepard's going to be interesting as a
I
leverage.
actually, one of the players I got to the most in my practice builds was K. Otten.
Yes, because he's also
Um,
going to be direct leverage off Tez one-offs.
Yeah, and he's pretty cheap. He's like in that cheaper tight end pool that I think is playable. And Baker really relied on him after Evans got hurt, and so like I think Kate Otten is like relatively curious. Now the thing that I'm really curious
Kate
about,
Otten
like I
curious.
said, is I think Igbuka is also clearly one of the best values on the slate, and so like do people play Tez
Yeah.
Johnson and Igbuka together, or do lineups end up being they have one of Igbuka and one of Tez Johnson because
Yeah.
if Tez Johnson guys don't want to play Igbuka, then like I think it's like in a case where you might end up with Bijan and Jonathan Taylor as the running backs, then they play like Tez Johnson and a bunch of mid-range receivers like Olave.
I mean, this won't be super. Sorry, I don't know what I was going to say there, but here, so people at least initially were looking at Jones and Nix garnering the most ownership. For $300 more, Baker potentially being much lower owned, and then pairing him with Tez. Like, I could see building some Baker lineups where I have Tez, and I could see playing no Tez in some of my other ones. Like, Bo Nix, perhaps I'm taking a different path there where Bo Nix and Tez I'm not going to play together. But when I have a low-owned Baker to pair with them, and that would be Pater approved. James would sign off on that.
I think Baker's
He's going to
sharp.
hate one.
I really like Tampa lineups.
Yeah, I do too.
My favorite two pay-ups as of right now are Philly and Tampa. I think Dallas
Yeah,
is
me
also
too.
interesting. I like Dallas
Me
every
too.
week because their defense is so bad and they have to throw the ball 50 times a game.
Yep.
Now the downside with Dallas is that all three of their pieces are now expensive.
Yeah.
Ferguson is 6K, who I think is a great play, by the way, this week. I don't think anyone's
How's
going
the
to play him
matchup
because he's
with the
so
Broncos?
expensive now and CeeDee Lambs is back. But like the only spot that Denver is actually weak to is tight ends. I don't know if you know that. They shred everybody else. But tight ends have done like relatively well against them this year. So like
Really? I'm
Ferguson,
seeing fantasy points against not very good for tight ends against the Broncos. Are you sure?
yeah. Let's just take a look. I did all this on my sheet this week. The thing with fantasy points against is it uses the full season, and what I do is 3 weeks.
Oh,
at a
okay.
time.
3 weeks? Okay.
Yeah, and so last week we had Denver and the Giants. Daniel Bellinger had 3 catches for 88 yards and a touchdown, and Theo Johnson had 3 catches for 66 yards and a touchdown.
Okay.
Week 6 before that was the Jets, and Mason Taylor had 1 catch for 2 yards because Justin Fields was throwing the football and he only completed 9 passes. And before that, we
Say
actually
less.
had Philly and the Eagles, where Goddard had 3 catches for 20 yards and a touchdown. And so really a lot of that, I think, is slanted from last week. But at the same time, it's
Yeah.
like if we look at who had the best games a lot this year, it's pass-catching running backs and tight ends because I think their linebackers are susceptible when I think that their corners are like a lot better. And so you take, in my opinion, two gambles. That CeeDee Lamb is better than Patrick Surtain, which, if you feel that way, totally fine.
I mean, I wouldn't put a whole lot of stock into Sertan. I mean, I've seen him get torched a few times already. I wouldn't say.
Yeah, I mean, but he's still the best cover corner in the game and has been for a long time.
Okay. Maybe I'm waiting. I mean, he did face the greatest wide receiver in the league in A.J. Brown, so I'm just remembering a lot of that. So perhaps it's bias on my part.
Or A.J. Brown didn't even have the best game out of all the receivers in that game, right?
In that game, yeah, I think Smith had a better game than him.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah.
I mean, like I said, it's like if we look at last week with the Giants, Wanda Robinson had 6 catches for 95 yards. Scattaboo, though, 3 catches for 34 yards and a touchdown. Theo Johnson, 3 catches for 66 yards and a touchdown. Bellinger, 3 catches for 88 yards and a touchdown. Jackson Darling completed 15 passes. Really not a lot better than Justin Fields, if you really think about it. But with that said, like I said, I think that it's just because of the 6K price point, no one's going to want to play him. But I think that he will get targets, especially after seeing the Giants exploit them the way that they did last week.
Okay.
And so, just from a ownership to ceiling standpoint, that game, if you think that game's going to blow up, I think Ferguson's a really interesting way to get access into it.
Yeah, well, I think at 6K he's going to be a lot lower owned. So I think that could be a unique way to.
He should be. Like I said, I think George Kittle is a great play. I mean, it's a bad matchup, but George Kittle is 4,500, especially if Purdy's back.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just looking at NBA late swap. I just want to see if all my lineups are locked or if I have to do another run before 10. Yeah, all my lineups are locked, I think. Okay.
But
right,
so one of the last things I kind of touch on here is predicted pressure because how much I believe in it.
Yeah, I do too.
Some of the top matchups there that people especially won't expect. One is CJ Stroud, and so I think if you go back and you watch the games with this, it's actually really interesting that when Stroud's in a clean pocket, he looks like prime CJ Stroud still. When he gets blitzed though, because his offensive line's absolutely terrible, he looks around and is a deer in headlights, and then throws an interception right afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
And the predicted pressure matchups actually show that that's true. He has, right now, just so you know, the second highest EPA in clean pressure out of anybody that's playing this
I was
week.
just looking at that.
And he's projected to not get blitzed very much. And so,
obviously,
if Nico Collins doesn't play, I definitely don't want to play any CJ Stroud. But, I just think it's a really interesting shout-out nonetheless. Another really interesting one to me is Michael Penix. I don't think anybody's really going to play Penix this week. We kind of talked about cheaper quarterbacks. I think Penix kind of fixed that. You could play Penix, London and Mooney, or Penix, Bijan, and Pitts. There's a lot of different things that kind of go in that, and I think Penix is really interesting. And then you could also bring that back with the chain and still play both of the top running backs. So that's just an interesting shout when I was looking at all this. And then another one that I thought was really interesting is Jalen Hurts.
Yeah. Did you
if
see the
everyone's
price on the
Lamar
pass
Jackson
catchers
this week, I will very, very happily play Jalen Hurts stacks.
Did you see the pricing on Brown and Smith?
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, they're
not very often they're going to have huge games like that together. I think that is kind of a one-off.
Yeah,
but I think because they
run.
went off that way, no one's going to play Dallas Goedert this week. Because he kind of had a bad game last week, and he's in that cheaper tight end pool that people are going to be looking for. I think Goddard makes a lot of sense. I love the thought of Hurts plus one of the 6K Eagles receivers and Goddard. And then bringing that back with the cheap Wandale Robinson.
Yep. Yeah, I like that too. So we have a lot of the same teams. I'm really interested in Philly. I'm really interested in Baltimore if Lamar is going to play. I probably will have a Denver stack as well. And I'm interested in Tampa. The last one.
I don't want to play any Baltimore, man, especially if they're chalky. Just like you were talking about with the Colts, I just don't know that with their defense being back, that Caleb Williams is good enough to push them. I really think that it could be to a point that Derrick Henry is a great play, and he might just be something at 6K that you have to eat.
Yeah. No, I think that's a fair point.
I
I'll
do
have to give
like,
that some
however,
thought
if
about
you're
how I'm
taking
gonna
a
approach
gamble in
that.
that game, as long as he's not chalky, I think Rome Odunze is like a fair shout to be a good piece of that game. Like maybe if you're playing Henry, you run it back with Rome and think that like it's not like a total blowout to where like all the starters are pulled and Derrick Henry gets 25, 30 carries and Rome sees 10 targets.
Hmm.
Like something like that might make sense if you're going to play Derrick Henry.
Yeah. I mean, he's down to 6,300. We we believe that that's going to be a trailing game state for them. So I like the idea of correlating Henry with Adunze, and I don't think. Yeah, I'm not sure the ownership projection's still pretty early, but excuse me. I think that's a good way to account for that.
Yeah, and I think that's mostly all I have to talk about today, man. I will say, let me
Oh,
see.
I'm interested in the Giants too. Eagles defense is giving up a lot of points. I'm interested in Dart plus Wandale, maybe one of his cheap tight ends too.
See, I don't want to play Dart. I don't think he has the ceiling. I think Dart's one of those guys that he's kind of priced in the same way that like Baker and all them are priced, but he's not quite a runner like Josh Allen, where he can put up like 2, 3 touchdowns very frequently. But he's also like I think his pricing makes him really like prohibitive to have on your team. Like when you just line him up next to Dak, Baker, uh, let's see. So in that same category, Jackson Dart's 5,500, right? I guess that's
Yeah,
a little cheaper, but that's still you need him essentially to beat Bo Nix, like for sure, and Daniel Jones. And I even don't think that's possible. I mean, it's possible. Don't get me
oh,
wrong.
I think that very rarely he could beat Daniel Jones. Bo Nix is going to be a little bit tougher. Um,
I would rather play Brock Purdy, $300 above him, with Christian McCaffrey and George Kittle, and just get all the chalk, but with the quarterback that nobody wants to play.
the other thing we didn't mention, I think your the Texans look is really interesting. I'm going to have to think about that some more. But the fact that Stroud does so well when he does not have pressure, and then he's not expected to face a lot. I do want to go back and look at the pressure rates just last week because San Fran adjusted their defense with Fred Warner out, and they looked improved last week. But the other part of this is Nico Collins had a concussion. He didn't practice today. He's not likely to go. Christian Kirk did not practice. He's not likely to go. So Hutchinson, Schultz, and Stroud could be really interesting. If
Yeah,
he's going to have a clean
Christian
pocket.
Kirk is also out.
Yeah, I mentioned that. He didn't
Oh,
practice
okay,
today.
yeah. So
Yeah,
like we also could potentially have Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel, which like that's like really thin. I would only do
yeah,
that like in Stroud stacks. I think you could play Hutchinson and Schultz separately. But that would again, because you get a 3K player, put you back in cheap stack territory, where you could
right.
probably play the three of them with one of the two rookies and still play three studs.
That's what I was thinking. That might be a way that I'm more interested in playing a
I think
deep
Tyrod
stack.
Taylor is actually a really good shout, man. It's like kind of crazy, but like Tyrod Taylor is like a good facilitator. Um,
Does anyone is anyone a good facilitator though in that offense? I mean, he's been in so far this year. He just hasn't looked. I mean, I like him. I used to call him Ty God, and I think that's a pay dirt like euphemism reference. But that offense just them in Tennessee just don't look like
Tyrod
anything I
Taylor
want to
scored
be
18
invested in.
fantasy points in week 3, dude, in his only start.
Okay, well, this is a nut matchup. Now Tyrod he was limited in practice with his knee today,
He'll play,
so
man.
you think he's gonna play?
Yeah, they're gonna play him. And like I said, at
Okay.
4,500, the interesting thing with them, like we just talked about with Nico Collins, is that Garrett Wilson is also out, which means that you're playing him with Josh
Reynolds,
Reynolds, who is
Taylor.
really, really, really cheap. He's 3,900, and he had 9 targets last week. That means that
Yeah,
you can play him with Mason Taylor, who has sucked the last couple of weeks, but I think that Tyrod might be able to unlock Mason Taylor in a way that Justin Fields couldn't. So like Mason Taylor's 3,500, and it's like literally the nut matchup of all tight ends. So like I low key like the Jet stacks, especially with Jamar Chase.
yeah. You run it back with Chase there. I have a little bit of interest on Brown. Now Chase Brown, now that his price has dipped down to 5,400, and they
I
could
think it's
be in a
still a
leading.
really bad matchup, man.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not saying he couldn't pop. He can.
But we've talked about him before. He has never reached the ceiling that you've needed. So
You are correct. But at his current price, he doesn't need 30 points anymore.
yeah,
If he gets you 26, which he's hit a bunch of times, you're like probably in a good spot now.
yeah, and I like Chase there better, but I just
Yeah,
have
the problem with that is that for him to hit that ceiling, he's not a very good runner. He's always been inefficient. He needs a bunch of targets, and Flacco hasn't targeted him in that kind of rate.
yeah, and they're like if they're we expect them to be in a leading game state, he's not going to get the passing work as often.
Yeah, so like I said, that's all just really early stuff for me. A lot of just
Yeah,
different thoughts. The one thing that I will leave off here at the end that I think could be interesting, but it's kind of a stretch. Um, I have a lot of interest in J.K. Dobbins and R.J. Harvey this week.
the matchup's good.
Yeah, and because everybody's playing Denver passing game, I don't think anyone's going to play them.
Direct leverage.
Now, Dallas gives up a ton of receptions to running backs, which I think makes R.J. Harvey at least a little bit interesting.
Yeah.
He's had targets of 1, 2, 3, 5, 3, 4, and 2 this year, and with all those, he's had 6.5 fantasy points or more 4 times, and one of those is a 20-point game. Now, I'm not saying 6.5 is good. If you get 6.5, you're absolutely cooked, even at 4K. But if this is like a shootout like we think it is, and he's getting some targets and everything, Dobbins is more the priority play there. I just think R.J. Harvey is like semi-interesting in that 4K range, especially if you're playing like a Dallas stack.
I definitely agree with that. I'm interested in those running backs. And it's the game environment and it's the direct leverage. So when I'm building, another lineup that does not include Denver, that might have some chalk, then I can play Dobbins with them, get direct leverage on all of the ownership that's, going to be on Bo Nix. So
I also think Bo Nix is cheap enough that you could do the thing I talk about and play Bo Nix with J.K. Dobbins and Son.
no. Cut that from
I'll
the
tell you right
podcast.
now, when I was running the Sims last week, well, I played a lot of Bo Nix, by the way, and the Sims that I use, like we're saying,
Yeah.
they were great stacks. The Sims were including Dobbins in about 50% of those stacks. That like it was an intelligent play, and it could have been. Think about it: Bo Nix had one less rushing touchdown, and it would have went to Dobbins instead of Bo Nix. And then all of a sudden, Bo Nix has 31 points, and J.K. Dobbins has 23. And so like it's one of those things where it's interesting enough where it's worth it if you think that Denver's the nut matchup and you're looking at how to get different. Instead of playing one of the unoptimal low wide receivers and hoping that you catch the touchdown, I like the idea of Bo Nix, J.K. Dobbins, and Courtland Sutton.
In a sport in which we value correlation to reach ceilings, I do not like playing players that are negatively correlated with each other. So,
Sure, I won 2 times last year with negatives players that are negatively correlated with each other. One of them was Josh Allen and James Cook, who I ran with zero
I
wide
mean,
receivers, by the way. I played Josh Allen and James Cook as the stack.
yeah, I mean, I think there's some small circumstances, but I think as an industry, the DFS industry is overvalued. I don't know why we've become like so interested in playing running backs with the quarterbacks.
Because the
But
idea is
I'm
that
not
it's
with
not
it.
you're betting that a team scores a lot of points. If Denver scores 50 points and they all come through Bo Nix and J.K. Dobbins, you've collected 100% of the touchdowns.
Yeah, I mean, a 50-point game is a pretty extreme ceiling. I mean, last week they scored 33. So take 30, 33, 36 and cut it up from there. I just think when you're trying to reach ultimate ceilings and then you have players that are going against each other to get that. I mean, and maybe again that's a smaller field mindset, but like I don't want to have to be right about that many things. I just think I'd rather use those running backs and other lineups to get leverage than try to have to be perfect and they both reach the ultimate ceiling.
I don't think you're not playing though to get the ultimate ceiling at that point. Like I said, like I think that's kind of like this is the last little argument I'm going to make, and then I'm going to hop. Like that's another like big piece that people don't talk about. It's like if we actually let's take away all the correlation and everything for just a second and talk about this game from a macro standpoint. This is a game where you're playing against thousands and thousands of other people, where you have a $60,000 salary to score the most points, right? On a slate like this, on average, where we have this many stars, you're probably going to need 240 to 250 fantasy points to win a game, which means that every single player that you roster has to score 30 fantasy points. Every single one. If they can't score 30, you're probably not going to get there, right? That's like
Yeah, I think that's a good way to describe it. Yeah.
so. Is it likely that J.K. Dobbins and Bo Nix both score 30 fantasy points? It's not.
Yeah. I
But the
agree with
reason
that.
that you would play something like that is if, for whatever reason, that's not the score that it takes, right? Because there's not enough players to get to 30 fantasy points. A lot of the studs fail. And then if Dallas and Denver is the only game environment that goes off, you would actually just want as many players from that game as possible. And so, in a way like that, you would essentially play Bo Nix, J.K. Dobbins, Cortland Sutton, Ferguson, and C.D. Lamb. And you would just take all of them, right? Because now the only bet that you're making is that this is the only game that they combine for 80 points. And you want as much of it as possible. And so the part that people don't think through enough is that it's not always the same goal. When you're thinking through how these different rosters get there, you have to start thinking about like what would fail and what's it look like, and then build around it. And so like I wouldn't build you don't run Bo Nix, J.K. Dobbins, Cortland Sutton with no run back. Like that's mental.
Yeah. You need ultimate ceiling for all those guys to get there, so you absolutely want a run back.
Yeah, and so, but like I said, you don't necessarily need ultimate ceiling, right? It's like what if every other game
Oh,
fails?
but all the other games failed. But that
But
game
like this
they're
game
pushing
goes
each
off.
other.
So like
in
you
that
don't
game.
need
Yeah.
ultimate ceiling. They don't need to score 40 fantasy points. But if they combine for 170 and nothing else does that, all of a sudden you're ahead of the whole field. And so like I think a part that really gets lost in correlation and numbers and projections and all that stuff is that all of these different kinds of lineups can hit and win. It's not always about capturing the ultimate game. But it's important that if you're building one of these to actually understand what you're building so that you can
Yep.
build it correctly instead of just building something to be unique.
Yep. Agreed. I agree with most of what you said.
But then you agree
I
with
th- I'm just not in the QB with running back camp. But the scenario, the way that you described it, and the way that we think about these games, and how the slate's going to play out, and having a lineup that is correlated in the right environments, like that these other environments are failing. We want a good portion of that game. All that makes sense to me. I understand.
I'll actually tell you a swap that I made this week. I kind of told you where this came from. Is that I think my new base stacks is quarterback +1/+2.
Okay. You want to tell us a little bit how you got there, like why you're doing that?
I don't want to get too far into it. I mean, I've started delving into more high level players and like dissecting how they play.
Okay.
But the reasoning behind it is, and this is kind of counterintuitive to something I talked about early this season, but we know that most of the time, pass catchers only get there with one person. We do know that.
Yeah. We know that.
But the
Yeah.
problem with that is if you run that, you're taking a whole bunch of individual bets on like skinny stacks and everything else. And so, if you actually think through it, it's like in this scenario, you don't want like C.D. Lamb and George Pickens as your +2. This isn't Nix, Sutton, Pickens, and Lamb. That looks horrendous. Because if Lamb and Pickens both get there, you should really just play Dak.
Right.
And play Sutton by himself.
Right.
But think into a spot where what's something we could talk about. I'm going to use Tennessee here, not because it's like the right one, just because I think that the Colts are an interesting part to talk about. Where let's say you say Cam Ward and DK with Tyler Warren and Jonathan Taylor.
Yeah.
Where you have
So-
one cheaper play that's like relatively good, and then one more expensive play where they could both get there independently of each other, and then you're getting four pieces right if you just get the one game environment right.
Yes.
And I think that that's a really interesting build because I think that when you win GPPs a lot, it actually is because you've hit the right game environment, and people are afraid to take those big bets. And so, like, I actually think one of the highest things you could do if you like to win top 1% lineups, this isn't going to get you, like, mid-place, but it's to overstack the same game with 4 or 5 players from potentially both teams and then just nail the right game environment. And then play chalk around them.
Yeah. I think most people are afraid of that because of loss aversion, that they feel like I can't play. There's not enough points to go around. I don't want to play 2 pass catchers from the same game. But I think that's a really interesting way to think about it.
And I'll tell you one spot where I actually like it a lot, looking at everything, and you said this earlier, is Spencer Rattler, Chris Olave with Tez Johnson and Emeka Egbuka.
Yeah, I think that's a good example.
Where if Emeka and Tez can both hit without Baker scoring 40. If Baker scores 26 and Rattler gets you 19, but it saves you $1,200. And then also Olave goes off for 28 fantasy points, and you get all the best parts without while still having optimal pieces. And so when you start thinking about it through that, we talked about earlier how I really didn't think enough about what each individual lineup actually looked like. I made rules, but they were all surface level rules. They weren't actually thinking through at a micro level. And I think one of the biggest things that we could do right now is just think through more things like that and build lineups really intentionally with those ideas.
Yep. Yeah, and that's what I've been focusing on. I'm doing six lineups a week, but I'm hand building it, and I'm thinking if A, then B. So there's reasons why I'm building them the way that I am.
And I think think about it this way, that if you were really in on a game environment, and this is kind of so you don't like the Colts, right? I'm coming back to the Titans because I just want to talk through some of these ugly things real quick, then we'll wrap it up. Okay. But let's say that you love the Colts this week, but you're sitting here telling me you hate the Titans. You don't, so this doesn't apply to you. But for anybody watching this show that was ooh, Titans, do this whole thing, but you're playing Daniel Jones, it kind of makes you an idiot. Because if you actually think that the Colts are a really good stack, you should have trail bets that Cam Ward would also get there. And so when you think about this through what's really likely to succeed, and if you have one stack that you really like, I think you should have a lineup on the other side of that on both sides, kind of hitting the same game environment multiple times. Because if you get that game environment right, you probably win. Mm-hmm. And so it's just kind of a thing where you're making trail bets based on the things that you like about other things that could possibly happen in that game.
Yeah, totally agree with that. I was thinking the same thing. If you want to play a Colts stack, but you don't think there's going to be any production from the Titans to push them,
if you really believe in the Colts stacks this week, you should have one Titan stack. And if you're not comfortable having one Titan stack, you shouldn't play any Colts stacks.
Yeah, and I said in the beginning, I'm at this point. My initial thought is I don't want to have either.
Yeah,
of those.
like I said, that's totally fair.
I'll have
for anybody
JT.
watching this, it's man, the Colts are awesome, but ew, the Titans. It's if you think that, don't play the Colts. Do yourself a favor and you pick something.
Those
else.
stacks are correlated. The passing games.
Thank you, baby. 1 sec.
All right, ready to wrap up?
Yeah, my dog needs to go outside. Our yard
Okay.
is all cement here. I thought I got a yard and it's all cement, so I've got to take her on a leash.
I took her outside of the
I know,
grass,
but
and she's just
she's never went on a leash before.
she's just staring down the grass.
But yeah, Ryan, as always, thanks for talking football with me today. I feel like this is we've done plays and stuff. This was a really intensive, game theory roster construction conversation that I think is actually really unique and different. So hopefully everybody enjoyed it. Good luck this week. Hope you win more money, and I'll see you next week.
Awesome. Thanks, David.
All right, I'll see you guys.
All right, see you, man.